Hello and welcome. Today we're diving deep into the hidden life of a Southern heiress who was once the pride of Louisville's most influential media empire, until her own family chose to erase her story. Meet Henrietta Bingham, a woman of immense wealth, fierce independence, and unapologetic love that defied 20th century conventions. Join us as we uncover how a private scandal and a thirst for control led a powerful dynasty to cast aside one of its most extraordinary members. Are you ready to explore a forgotten chapter of American history? Let's begin. Henrietta Bingham was born in 1901 into a world of extraordinary privilege and responsibility. Her father, Robert Worth Bingham, would eventually become both a powerful newspaper magnate and the U.S. ambassador to the court of St. James under Franklin D. Roosevelt. Her mother, Eleanor Miller, was said to possess a quiet elegance and a lively wit, attributes Henrietta appeared to inherit in full measure. As a child, Henrietta was indulged. She had a large bedroom in the family's Louisville mansion, top writing instructors, private tutors who taught her not just grammar and arithmetic, but French, piano, etiquette, and the subtle art of social graces. Even in a household that demanded politeness and perfection, the young Henrietta was known to push boundaries. She insisted on reading newspapers intended for adults, gleaning the sort of knowledge about politics, social issues, and even scandal that many women of her station were discouraged from absorbing. Her father, though a formidable figure, found it difficult to deny her anything. She was the only daughter, after all, and her curiosity amused him even if it sometimes made him uncomfortable. In 1913, tragedy struck. Henrietta's mother died in a terrible car accident, leaving her father devastated and Henrietta, at just 12 years old, without a maternal anchor. The funeral was a somber affair, documented by local reporters who were eager to glean the mood of the Bingham household. Young Henrietta stood with a stoic expression as her father clutched her hand at the graveside. Louisville's high society whispered about how the Bingham patriarch might handle a motherless daughter in a time when girls were expected to be introduced to polite society with all the decorum and guidance an older female figure could provide. One assumption was that Robert Bingham would send Henrietta to a finishing school or rely on a rotating cast of governesses. Instead, he pulled her closer. It's said that from the day of the funeral onward, father and daughter became inseparable, to an extent that raised eyebrows even among those who understood the grief that bound them. They traveled together for extended periods, often renting large homes in Europe, where Henrietta could study history, languages, and culture firsthand, away from the constraints of Louisville's society. The local gossip columns, ever eager for a glamorous story, portrayed Robert and Henrietta in glowing terms, a doting father ensuring his daughter experienced the world. Yet beneath the warmth of those write-ups, more salacious whispers traveled among the upper crust. People asked why a teenage girl spent so many nights dining with prominent men of letters and politicians while her father looked on with paternal pride. The closeness was interpreted by some as an emotional crutch for Robert's grief, by others as an improper or at least odd dynamic. Regardless of the truth, it didn't take long before the Bingham clan recognized that Henrietta's unconventional bond with her father might tarnish their image. When Henrietta came of age in the early 1920s, she seemed poised to become the quintessential Southern debutante, a star at Louisville's most prestigious gatherings. Perhaps the future bride of a promising young banker, lawyer, or politician. But that was never truly Henrietta's nature. Before finishing her formal education, she enrolled at Smith College, then traveled abroad to England, where she immersed herself in circles quite different from the mainstream Southern aristocracy. In London and Cambridge, she encountered members of the Bloomsbury Group, intellectuals, writers, and artists who championed liberal social attitudes and defied Victorian constraints on literature, art, and sexuality. For Henrietta, it was like stepping into a new world that finally validated her desire to question norms. She had always been the kind of person who hated to be told no, or that's not ladylike, or this is just the way things are. In Bloomsbury salons, no one told her any of those things. She spoke with people like Virginia Woolf, Dora Carrington, and the art critic Clive Bell. They saw in Henrietta a vivacious conversationalist with an acute sense of style, a rebellious streak, and a willingness to discuss ideas, particularly about women's roles and love, that were downright incendiary to conservative American sensibilities. She found it freeing, exhilarating, and also terrifying, because each day she felt herself drifting further from the life Kentucky had expected her to lead. When she visited Louisville for short stays, Henrietta made no secret of her changing persona. She wore riding breeches and men's-style shirts. She cropped her hair, sometimes slicking it back the way she had seen in avant-garde European fashion magazines. She didn't wait for an escort to drive her around. She commandeered the family's car herself, or, more shockingly, rode a motorcycle she purchased after seeing them used by British dispatch riders. Worse yet, from the point of view of a conservative family, she seemed uninterested in suitors from acceptable backgrounds. She might dance at a ball with a wealthy local beau, but only out of courtesy, never with any real spark. Rumors spread that she would vanish after these events, heading to a speakeasy on the outskirts of town or a bohemian party where jazz reverberated until dawn. Younger girls in Louisville found it glamorous and daring, but the older generation saw it as a defiance of every principle a Bingham woman was supposed to uphold. By this time, her father, Robert, was becoming more than just a newspaper mogul. His influence in politics grew, culminating in an ambassadorship to the United Kingdom. He had wealth, power, and a public image to protect. And while he once doted on Henrietta, he now found that his superiors, his colleagues, and his high society friends were quietly questioning his daughter's behavior. Initially, he tried to brush it off as youthful experimentation. Then he attempted to persuade her to present a more traditional front, encouraging her to wear proper dresses, keep her personal life private, and at the very least refrain from riding a motorcycle in public. But Henrietta never responded well to being contained. If anything, she grew more flamboyant. She took up polo, a sport almost exclusively reserved for men of her status, and even had the audacity to appear in local equestrian events wearing tailored men's riding attire. The Courier-Journal's society page occasionally mentioned her escapades, but always in polite tones that hinted at admiration for her novel sense of style. What the official coverage never mentioned was that she also gravitated towards women romantically, a fact that would become the family's darkest secret. Henrietta's relationships weren't fleeting curiosities. Her most notable love was Mina Kirstein, a brilliant academic who taught literature and had a fervor for social justice. Mina was everything Louisville high society was not: bookish, intellectual, and deeply unimpressed by monetary influence. She loved Henrietta for her wit, her adventurous spirit, and her capacity to see beyond the gilded cage in which she had been raised. They exchanged letters that soared with poetic intensity, discussing art, music, the possibility of living together openly. Sometimes in these missives, Henrietta confessed her fear of what her father would do if he found out. Mina, for her part, urged Henrietta to stand firm, to carve a life free from secrets. By the late 1920s, the two women were effectively living together in a series of rented apartments in both Europe and the United States. Their love was passionate, complicated, and earnest, but it was also a direct threat to the carefully curated image of the Bingham dynasty. Robert Bingham discovered the relationship through a private investigator he'd hired. Horrified that his only daughter was ruining herself and the family name by engaging in what he viewed as a scandalous affair, he took drastic steps. When gentle persuasion and emotional manipulation failed, he resorted to medical intervention. At the time, homosexuality was widely considered a mental illness, something that could be cured. Robert had the money and connections to ensure his daughter was placed in a psychiatric facility for what was euphemistically called treatment. The facility specialized in electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, a radical approach often used to subdue and control patients deemed deviant. The aim, from Robert's perspective, was to erase Henrietta's orientation, or at least bury it so deep she'd never act on it again. She was subjected to rounds of ECT that left her disoriented and robbed her of memories both cherished and painful. Under the watchful eye of doctors who were well compensated by the Bingham patriarch, Henrietta's every movement was monitored. Meanwhile, letters that arrived from Mina were confiscated or destroyed. Mina received threats to cease all contact or face legal consequences. The story that Robert circulated to close associates was that Henrietta had nervous troubles and needed rest. When Henrietta eventually emerged from that institution, she was a ghost of her former self. The once vibrant woman who wore tuxedos to parties and debated Bloomsbury intellectuals struggled to maintain a steady conversation. Family insiders later recounted that she would sometimes sit in the drawing room, wearing an expensive dress her father had chosen, turning the pages of a magazine without truly reading it. She seemed half present, as though a part of her soul had been siphoned off in the therapy sessions. Yet she continued to exude an odd magnetism. People could still see flickers of that old brilliance beneath the sedation. She lived in the Bingham home as a silent fixture, rarely questioned by visiting family friends, seldom invited to large social functions. To outsiders, she was just a shy, somewhat eccentric woman whose health was too fragile for the rigors of high society. Within the house, she was under constant surveillance by staff who reported back to Robert about any suspicious behavior. And if the staff saw a letter from Mina or noted an offhand comment that suggested Henrietta still harbored romantic feelings for another woman, they would deliver that information promptly. The Bingham patriarch's power extended even into her personal rooms. In 1937, Robert Worth Bingham died unexpectedly from complications of an illness, and the dynastic responsibilities passed to other members of the family, particularly Henrietta's siblings. Yet even in his will, Robert ensured that Henrietta would remain under a form of control. It was rumored, though never publicly confirmed, that he included clauses restricting her inheritance unless she agreed to certain conditions about her personal life. Whether or not these restrictions were legally binding, the family effectively kept Henrietta on a tight financial leash. They feared scandal, they feared exposure, and they feared the public might discover how they'd coerced and confined their beloved heiress. By the early 1940s, Henrietta was an aging socialite with no official role in the family business, no recognized relationships, and a dwindling social circle. A wave of lawsuits, internal disputes, and fractious infighting about the direction of the Bingham media holdings ensued in subsequent decades. Observers said the family was fracturing from within, a process that might have begun with the silent condemnation of their own daughter. Despite everything, Henrietta refused to quietly expire. There are accounts of her making sudden appearances at local events, sometimes wearing an elegantly cut suit that hinted she had not lost her flair for bending gender expectations. She was spotted at a few jazz clubs in Louisville and at polo matches. Though she never competed again, she would occasionally cheer on the sidelines. People who spoke to her during those rare glimpses said she seemed both charming and deeply sad. She drank too much, they said, and her laughter had a hollow ring to it. At times, she would slip away from the main crowd to stand alone in corners, as though the noise overwhelmed her or reminded her of a life she once had. She rarely spoke of her father or her time in the hospital, but if asked about relationships, she would give a wry smile and change the subject. In the mid-1950s, the Bingham empire began to show cracks. The Courier-Journal still commanded respect, but the family's internal dramas threatened to overshadow the legacy. Cousins and siblings feuded, court cases cropped up over accusations of mismanagement, and rumors of betrayals and cover-ups abounded. People who had once revered the name Bingham as a bastion of Southern journalism began to wonder if the mighty house was rotting from within. Financial strains, personality clashes, and generational changes in the newspaper industry all contributed to the clan's slow implosion. By the early 1960s, the Binghams found themselves selling off certain assets to maintain their broader holdings. And throughout this, Henrietta remained on the fringes, an unspoken reminder of the family's ability to devour its own in the name of propriety. Henrietta's final years were lived in relative obscurity. She rented a small apartment. Some accounts say it was in a less fashionable part of Louisville. Others say she might have moved out of Kentucky for a while. No one is certain because the family avoided any mention of her in their newspapers, and by then the local community had grown used to her absence. She did not appear to have any close companions. Her father was gone. Her siblings were preoccupied with their own power struggles, and any lover or friend from her younger days had been alienated or frightened away. She kept a low profile, apparently surviving on a modest allowance and occasionally selling jewelry or family heirlooms to make ends meet. Some nights neighbors recalled hearing music play softly in her place, jazz records, perhaps a nod to the free-spirited years of her youth. She became a figure of whispers, someone people might point to on the rare occasions they saw her, remarking that she had once been part of Kentucky's most prominent dynasty, though you wouldn't know it by looking at her now. In 1968, she passed away at the age of 67. The details of her death remain vague, possibly due to the family's direct intervention. It is widely believed that no mention of her passing appeared in the Courier-Journal's obituaries or any other Bingham-owned outlets. No public memorial service was held. Few, if any, family members attended her funeral. She was, in effect, wiped from the official Bingham narrative. The reasons are heartbreakingly clear. She threatened the family's conservative sense of order by refusing to conform to the expectations placed upon her as a wealthy Southern heiress. She represented a truth that clashed with the polished facade of the Bingham brand, especially at a time when revelations of homosexuality could spell ruin for public figures. In the end, the quiet violence done to Henrietta's life, through forced medical treatments and social exile, ensured she could not overshadow the family's ambitions. Thank you so much for joining us on this illuminating journey into the life of Henrietta Bingham, the heiress whose bold spirit could not be contained even by her family's formidable influence. If her story moved you, don't forget to hit like, share this video, and subscribe for more in-depth explorations of hidden histories, compelling figures, and stories that deserve to be heard. Until next time, take care and keep seeking the untold tales that shape our past and our future.